Growing up, being left-wing was the standard position for most young people. In higher education, being left-wing was the only position one could take if one was interested in caring for the poor. Or at least that's how it seemed. But in recent years, the left has taken a noticeable turn for the worse, one that can no longer be ignored by moderates or even liberals. The culture war that is spreading into every domain is an inevitable byproduct of this phenomenon. As more moderates and liberals become either right wing or are left politically homeless, we must ask ourselves, how and when exactly did this happen? In particular, why is left wing ideology becoming more popular with the wealthy, while losing ground with the poor? The following is a discussion we had over this very topic. Yeah. Yeah, so the topic is today is about how you've noticed that over the years the left has seemed to move the goalpost to the point where it's no longer recognizable and you no longer really recognize it. So like, do you want to talk about that real quick and your experiences?
Yeah, because my earliest experiences with the left, or I don't know, saying the left is weird because I think I would like to think growing up, I grew up mainly in a Democratic household. It's kind of 50-50 in my extended family too. There's a good amount of conservatives, but I remember just even in kindergarten, you remember I don't know if you did this in school. We had like a mock election for kids between Gore and Bush. And that was the first time I quote unquote pretend voted, or that was our first ever first moment that I remembered oh I align with a certain I don't know political party, if you will. But I just remember I was very anti-war and anti-Bush during '03 throughout the mid 2000s. And Like I don't know. I don't know if it's around after 2012 leading up to 2014 that I felt like the Democratic Party kind of switched because it seemed way more radicalized. And I don't know if it was just, I don't know, like a conscious effort to do so. You know what I'm talking about? What was your experience with your early years?
I just remember in the 2000s, Democrats used to be like just anti-war, fairly socially liberal,
And anti-establishment too.
yeah, yeah,
That
very
that was
like
the
politically
biggest concern.
incorrect.
Yeah, and I it seemed like it was the party for the people, and then all of a sudden it's just they're all everything they do now feels like establishment, which is that's what turned me off of the Republicans, you know? So I just find that so weird. And yeah, I just don't know what the switch is. I feel like a lot of people are casual in terms of being up to date with politics, and I feel like a lot of maybe considered former Democrats feel the same way, or I don't know how the left feels hijacked. I don't even know why, really. After 2014, now just so ramped up where I don't know what it is anymore.
Do you often encounter that in real life? Because we often hear about that online, on Twitter, whatever.
Yeah, and then I think most rational people behind closed doors, at least, because when there'd be people bringing up the election, like, oh, are you gonna vote? Are you gonna do this? And then I feel like the moderates, whether they're left or right, they'll kind of avoid the subject and say they won't vote because the more, I guess, more passionate Democrats and Republicans will straight up say, oh, yeah, I'm going to vote. But I notice more moderate liberals, they'll just kind of stray away because there's a lot of things they don't like about the Democratic Party, but because they're aligned in that space, I feel like they don't have a voice or they feel kind of weird talking about it. And then the more hardcore conservatives, obviously, like they're different behind closed doors. I feel like a lot of people behind closed doors because of appearances and like fear of judgment, they act as they'll say certain things to kind of appease, so, like politically like correct themselves, and then behind closed doors, they're like, yeah, like I don't like you know Palestine being bombed, but I don't want to vote Democrat either to perpetuate that. And then I feel like the more mainstream or hip Democrats, they'll just blindly vote blue despite all these other issues that they might disagree with, which that kind of bothers me. So, but that's my experience with people talking about politics. It's pretty casual, nothing like extreme.
Yeah, I've noticed the biggest problem with the Democrats and like the liberals, the left these days is most of them don't pay attention. Like they think that if they just tune into like CNN or NBC once in a while, or if they read a few headlines, or if they listen to like Stephen Colbert make like a couple of jokes in some commercial
Yeah,
or whatever, they think that's all you need to be well informed in politics. And if that's all you follow, you're gonna think the Democrats haven't changed at all. You're gonna think the liberals haven't changed at all over the
yeah,
years. When in reality, they've been changing constantly for the past few decades or so. It's just that most people don't pay attention. I find
yeah,
that conservatives, especially ever since the MAGA era, have been much better at keeping track of what's going on in their party. Like if Trump is too soft on say abortion, immediately
mhm.
it's like his own fans will call him out on it.
Yeah,
Whereas you look at
yeah.
the Democrats, it's like most Democrats have no idea what any of the Democrat politicians are doing or talking about.
Right. Yeah. Like it seems more in line with like the typical like idea of a politician. And like I think like I notice the difference between like moderate, because I feel like most people are moderate. Like I think most people aren't on the extremes, at least the people I encounter. But I do notice the difference between like college educated moderate liberals and then like the more working class and the more, I hate to say, down to earth and like more grounded. Um, because people like on the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder, I feel like they feel way more disillusioned and they're way more distrusting of politics in general. And like deservedly so. And I just think with this election, like they the reason why a lot of them don't want to vote is because they feel like the both candidates aren't the best choice. And you could easily say that for like any election, but I think that's why a lot of them don't want to vote. And then the more college educated one, like they'll bleed blue no matter what. And
Yeah.
I find it hard to talk to those people just because if you're just willing to vote for your team and that's just what you align, and it goes for like conservatives too. Like it's hard for me to take someone seriously if they do that, just because you shouldn't blindly just vote for a party because if voting really does matter, and I know Democrats tend to say like, oh, voting matters, like don't throw your vote away. It's like I remember the first time I could ever vote, and it was the last time I ever did vote, was for Obama the second term. And I remember like I like him as a president because he's like very eloquent, he's very diplomatic, and like appearance wise, like he's everything I would want in a president. But like Palestine was being like bombed back then too. And I realized, okay, like if I vote and these things happen, I feel like I'm responsible. So I rather not if I know a candidate's more like predisposed to like be pro war or whatever, you know?
Yeah. That's what I've noticed as well, because like I come from that academia background,
Hmm.
and what you'll often see is that people will say that there are certain things they don't like about the Democrats. Like these are people who might complain that their workplace is becoming too woke and they
Yeah.
can't stand all that wokeness.
Hmm.
But then when push comes to shove, they'll still vote for Democratic politicians who advocate for that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and they'll fall in line with it. And I think that's a I don't know. There's probably someone smarter out there that can like explain why modders kind of fall in line because I feel like the more the more convicted and like minority, I feel like they hold more sway. You know, people talk about like, oh, like it's only the vocal minority that's like making noise. But I'm like, but they're also making progress. Like they're also
Yeah,
swaying public opinion, you know? Like I feel like when you're kind of on the fence, not on the fence, but like you're much easier to just like, you know, if you lean Democrat or you lean Republican, it's much more easy for you to just like fall in line if push comes to shove, rather than just be nuanced and like not vote at all. And then you end up being hated by both sides anyways.
yeah. The
But
thing I've noticed about, and like you said, it's usually like the more educated people that have this problem. They're usually not as far left as a lot of conservatives think, because oftentimes conservatives will say, "Oh, well, college is just full of like communist professors," and some of them are, but most of them aren't. Most of them are just passive liberals who will vote for whoever like Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert likes on TV.
right,
They'll just vote for whoever they think the academic establishment is in favor of. Like they want to vote for the person who looks the best, who sounds the best, the
right.
person who seems to have the most credibility at a superficial level. But if you actually ask them about actual specific policy, most of them don't know. You ask them what these politicians are in favor of, they don't know. You ask them like, what about them flip-flopping on this and that? It's like they don't know. All they know
Yeah,
is that the Democratic candidate seems to be the more appropriate person compared to
yeah,
Donald Trump, who is like Satan basically. Because
right.
because like he's like the epitome of everything they don't like about like certain elements of America.
Yeah.
Like they're not very well educated, they're very crass, they seem racist or sexist.
Hmm.
They give off like the wrong kind of image. And like these upper middle class college educated liberals, they care a lot about that.
Yeah, like outward appearance and like image. That's why I don't know, like it's crazy because a lot of my friends do lean more like I don't know, like you said, like they'll vote establishment, like whoever looks good, sounds good. And like I'm literally everything they don't like. Not that I'm saying like I'm like a conservative, but like I am very crass and like I do act like unhinged. And like they have a sense of humor, so like they enjoy it, but like I'm like how Trump is where he's just like saying crazy shit or acting out. Like, yeah, that's pretty much how I do. Like maybe it's just because like I'm not running for president. I don't have the I'm not in that position, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, I do notice that those types of people they care more about outward appearances. And yeah, I just know America and the military industrial complex is like a huge thing. And if votes do matter, yes, like I guess they do. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, they might not, but I just don't like if I say I'm anti-war and I vote for a candidate that like pushes for it, whether or not the president or the individual themselves don't want it, those are that's pretty much like the hill I die on, you know? So that's why I choose not to vote. And friends from both political aisles kind of look at me funny when I say that.
Yeah.
'Cause,
Yeah, in many ways I think it's probably better to not vote if you're not sure about something than to vote in
yeah,
something when you're not sure and then regret it afterwards. And you see that with like Prop 47 in California,
yeah,
where it's like, oh, we're just gonna go easy on little kids who are selling weed in the streets. You know, we're not gonna throw kids in prison for selling weed in middle school anymore. They made it sound like really buttery and like really mild and likable. That's how it was written on the ballot. But when you actually look at the actual policy that's being implemented, it's like, oh well, if anyone commits a crime where they take less than $950, and they basically get a slap on the wrist. And
yeah.
the
It's a
slap on the wrist
misdemeanor.
Yeah, and a slap on the wrist basically means the cops aren't going to go after it because it's pointless. It's
Yeah.
just going to get dropped anyways.
Yeah,
Because
because then like if yeah, I always told you too. I believe that like people are more incentivized creatures than anything. So if you allow something, people will just take that and run with it, you know? That's why we have laws where we don't murder people because you like to think, oh, I would never do that. But I'm like, there's plenty of people out there that would, you know? Like that's why we don't legalize that. And I think that I mean, for a criminal or a small time criminal, that's great because like you just commit acts under 950, you're good. That's like if you're good at what you do, then that's good money, right? I mean, as
yeah,
dark as it sounds, but yeah, um, yeah, that's what I've been noticing too. I look at like I don't want to idolize Japan, but they have their own problems, but the fact that it's so safe and yeah, they have their problems with like work culture and everything, but a society like that it seems just so well organized and the crime is so low or non-existent that there's a couple of places like that too where I'm starting to like look at America way differently, like if we always want better, we want progress, like why is that not something we're striving towards, why there's so much degeneracy and crime. And I guess growing up now I'm kind of desensitized, like I'll like Like I go outside, like I'm not afraid to walk out at night, but I know a lot of people aren't, but kind of conditioned that way. But yeah, like I don't know, like I'm kind of disillusioned with like living in this country and like how policy works and how, lobbying is like such like a leading force into how, policies get enacted.
yeah. The thing about Japan is like most people, regardless if they're left wing or right wing, will agree that yeah, Japan is a lot better than America when it comes to things like safety and cleanliness. And
Mhm.
most people want that, but that doesn't mean they're willing to do what it takes to get it. Because if you tell them that, oh well, that means we're gonna have to crack down on crime a lot
Yeah,
harder, they don't want to do that, especially not the liberals. Because then like liberals and left wingers, they tend to be very big on being soft on victims of society, because they're always trying to, because they part of their identity is to look out for the little guy, the guy who's like marginalized.
right,
Like they'll try to view the criminal as, oh, well, he's just a victim of society. If only we corrected these systemic problems and like these crimes will go away. But that's not really true because poverty has always been a problem. If anything,
right,
there was like way more poverty 100 years ago than now. And yet,
right.
like crime rates are often higher now than they were. Like even during the Great Depression, when everyone was starving, crime rates were very, very low.
Yeah, I'm sure like it goes back to like incentives, like if we like I think Singapore is a textbook, like not a dictatorship, like it's totalitarian or something like that. But it's like super safe and it's like enjoyable to like most citizens are super happy to live there. But quote unquote, like they don't have that many rights. But things are so like people are on the same page that ends up being great, And I don't know. There's something to be said with Japan having a high conviction rate because it's a deterrent for people who would want to like do those things, And I think if we're too soft on quote unquote victims or whatever, then it's just it's just opportunity for more degeneracy and more crime, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like when parents are afraid to punish their kids for misbehaving. And so
Yeah.
they let their kids engage in all sorts of behaviors that deep down they don't like, but they pretend to be okay with it.
Mhm.
And then eventually it's like everyone hates being around them because then they'll have to be around their kids. They hate being around their kids.
Yeah, and then like people are gonna low key hate that kid, and like the parents, no parent would want that,
Yeah.
But I think like I get it, like marginalized people, like people at the edges, people who are like on the verge of like committing crime or like, you know, doing something they don't want to do, being in decent positions. I understand that, but there has to be an agreed upon like standard of like what's right or what's wrong. I understand the plight of poverty because we grew up super poor, so I get it. But yeah, the standards of like safety or whatever like should still be there because you go to an upper middle class neighborhood, like some of them might, a lot of them might or be what like especially liberals or even conservatives, like a lot of them are out of touch. And in a sense, like they're kind of like they're more afraid of anything. I wouldn't call them racist really, because I feel like that word's now overblown. But despite their let's say like uninformedness of the underclass or whatever, you rarely if ever see someone like, you know, overdose or like shoot up a neighborhood or anything like that, you know? And it's because they would never put up with that shit ever, you know?
Yeah.
And yes, like they come from wealth and like there's a whole context to it, but like, you know, when we grow up mainly in ethnic neighborhoods, like nothing crazy ever happened. Like we're all poor as shit, but like we still live by like a certain code of conduct.
Yeah.
And it was actually pretty cool, you know.
Especially in the
Growing up.
neighborhood where I lived, because like it was
Yeah,
like full of Section 8 public housing for
that
people.
was like the
And
lowest of the low. So
yeah, it's
like,
mostly immigrants who like hardly spoke any English, but usually whenever we did get crime, it was usually a white family. It's usually white people who are getting arrested.
yeah,
Usually
isn't
poor
that
whites.
crazy? Like, yeah, that's why like I kind of look at white people, some white people kind of funny. It's like, damn, dude, like we're the supposed like scary ethnic migrants or whatever, but like, yeah, you'll see like a white family like get called upon multiple times because of drugs or violence or whatever. But it just comes to standards, dude. Like I think it's something that's uncomfortable to think about, but you could apply it to your own life, you know.
Yeah.
Um, if you normalize something, it's you tend to get more of it, you know. Like I think people have a problem with like restricting, you know, like if you say like, no, I'm gonna try to sleep more, I'm gonna eat cleaner, I'm gonna not drink or do as much drugs. Like you have like you can restrict yourself, like you tend to be better off, even if it feels like your quote unquote freedoms are um being restricted. Yeah, that's another thing. Like I think like growing up I care less about having quote unquote freedoms. I don't even know what it is nowadays, but I just think the idea of like doing whatever you want, being free, like I feel like it's not beneficial to most people. I really don't think that, even for me, you know, like I rather, given that the person that's like telling me what to do is pushing me to become a better person, I'm much more willing to fall in line and do that versus like kind of just living some, you know, carefree life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I
Like,
mean like it kind of goes back to the whole what's it called? Broken windows theory. Like a lot of
yeah,
people who are like very left wing or very woke, they hate broken windows theory, but it's often true. I mean, because if you go to a mall that's really fancy, you go to the restroom there, it's super clean.
yeah,
Yeah, the cleaner the bathroom is, the less likely people are gonna litter. Meanwhile, you go to a place where like everything is just on the floor all the time, people are just gonna keep trashing it, you know?
it's yeah, it's crazy you say that because like the literal example I noticed, I remember my grandma's visiting maybe in a couple days, but I remember I live in a up and coming neighborhood, not up and coming, it's pretty much gentrified. It's like really nice to live now, but we have it's a high end or like a higher end grocery store called AJ's. It's just fancy. I don't know what the California equivalent is. We have like a Fry's, which is like a Ralph's or what have you. We have like AJ's, which is like overpriced shit. It's kind of like Whole Foods, but like somehow more pretentious. But going to that AJ's and going to a Walmart in like Scottsdale, which is like primarily upper income families, that Walmart was nicer than that AJ's down my house, down the street from my house. It was like a fucking Walmart, and like walking in was like a scene from like a slice of life anime. Like all the fruits and vegetables were super bright. There were no flies. Everything was just perfect. I'm just like mind blown. Like, why is this Walmart so nice? And it's just off the freeway somewhere. And that's another thing too, which it kind of sucks about being poor because schools like they're kind of funded publicly, right? So if you live in a higher income neighborhood, then your public schools will probably be better versus like somewhere in the inner cities. It's kind of fucked, but yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just what I noticed.
Yeah, it's all about norms. That's why it's like if you take a poor kid, but you have them go to like a fancier school, it's like sure they might not be as well off as the other kids, but then like they're gonna learn to put some structure in their life. That's why like you often hear guys who grew up poor, but they're grateful that they went to the military because the military introduced structure to their life.
Yeah, and routine and all that, and you have a sense of purpose. It's funny, like you mentioned that. Like I remember going out the other night, and like I was talking to my friend how I was like when I first moved to Arizona, I lived in a neighborhood called Maryvale in Phoenix. It's like notorious for like super high crime and like just like gun violence and drugs and all sorts of things happening there. And he was like, "Yeah, like I still live there, I still live in the trenches, but like we were just talking about school and how we grew up and what I did when I first moved here." But he told me how he went to a school called Brophy, and it's pretty much a private Catholic all boys high school. But like it's like I think you have to pay a tuition during attending there. But it's one of those places where you want to go there. You want your kids to go there because like it's a really good school. It's like highly regarded. And a lot of wealthy families go there. But he said he was like a token Mexican, so like they kind of gave him like a full ride or whatever. But like, cause I could tell the difference between him and like the kids who just went to a regular public school where there was like extreme violence and drugs and all that, and he seems so much more well adjusted and way more mature. I have a feeling like that probably played a part in it, but like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the one of the biggest problems with the left these days. It's like they're so terrified of being compared to fascists or like conservatives, right wingers, that they refuse to admit the importance of having structure and having expectations and standards. Because they're afraid that they'll be called too authoritarian or too traditional, etc., etc. And so they're all trying to demonstrate to each other. It's like, oh well, I'm the most inclusive, I'm the nicest person, I'm the
mm,
most empathetic person. You know, it's like we need to be show empathy towards poor people by letting them commit crimes.
yeah,
But what they don't realize is most poor people don't commit crimes and they don't
yeah.
like crimes.
Yeah, and to like speak on that, like I again, like we grew up poor, so I understand like fuck, like we like you could tell, especially growing up, you see like kids who are troubled, like yeah, like my life wasn't perfect, but like you could tell kids who are like deeply, deeply troubled, like things were not okay. Our classmates, like who were like always getting into trouble or like not mentally well, like the family household isn't stable. But at the same time, like it sucks that they're going through that, but you still need that standard of like what's not okay and what's okay because like I'm all for empathy, but I'm not okay with letting someone act a certain way just because they were less fortunate. Because you're just enabling them, you know?
Yeah, it's the soft bigotry of low expectations.
And like how do they expect to like get better from that if you allow that? Because it's just I mean, if you just want to distill everything into a game, like you're reinforcing that it's okay. You're reinforcing their victimhood, and if you want to argue that, like we're all victims, and like what are we supposed to do? Just like act at our lowest levels, or can we like strive to be our best despite not being as fortunate as our peers, you know?
Yeah,
Because yeah, like I grew up in Maryvale like in my early 20s. As soon as I could afford to like live in a nicer place and like overpay and pretty much be broke for a while, like I left because I didn't want to be around like the crime and degeneracy and all that. And like I never adopted, like the lifestyle that I saw out there from like people who were kind of more entrenched in that culture, that surrounding, because I always strive to do better. I don't know. I just don't buy that at all. And another thing is like I noticed a lot of more well-off Democrats or liberals, like it's easy to say that because like, one, they don't live there, and two, they don't understand what the implications of that. Because those people that you're enabling, like you're not around them. Like poor people are around them. If anything, you're like making it worse for the people you're supposedly trying to help.
yeah,
So if you live in like a gated neighborhood or like a more well-off neighborhood, and you don't live in a poor area, like like encouraging that shit is just screwing everyone else over. Because that's another thing. Like, if you're worried about those problems, like find like a solution. Like, I feel like all this posturing, all these empty words don't mean anything because if the poor areas aren't getting funding, they're not getting the support they need to like, invest in schools and like really, invest in the youth in those neighborhoods, those communities, then you're not really doing anything. I think it's always been that way. That's why I kind of don't care when I hear people kind of like talk about those talking points. It just like I'm desensitized to it. I don't ever buy it. But that's just me. I feel like it affects a lot of people still fall for that. So
yeah,
I don't know what your experience is with that.
yeah. Like a lot of that, yeah, like there's a lot of that kind of thinking once you get into like the academic circles, like the upper middle class liberal circles.
Hmm.
Again, a lot of it just goes back to like luxury ideas that
Yeah.
only privileged people can afford to have because they're not the ones who have to suffer the consequences of those ideas
Yeah.
when they backfire. Like this
Right.
whole idea that, oh well, the reason they're committing crime is because they're poor or because they're victims of racism or because our expectations on them were too strong and now they're rebelling. That's not really why. Because if
Yeah.
you look at most minority cultures at their core, they're fairly conservative. They
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
they
Most of
don't
them.
they don't want their kids to be having like having to be getting involved in gangs or having kids out of wedlock or anything. They're fairly conservative. A lot of them are religious.
Yeah.
But
And
then
yeah, and that's it goes back to like the Democrats during like the mid 2000s. It was so weird because yeah, I don't know, like I just felt like aligning with the Democrats back then, I felt like that like they're more likely the party to actually help ethnic groups and like the disenfranchised. But now I just feel like they're it's full of lies. I feel like they're just saying things just to say things because I feel like their policies don't help on the greater scale, like tying back to what we've been talking about. Like, I don't think anything they're supposedly think. I'm sure they think that they're helping, but I don't think they're doing anything that really is making change.
yeah, but the thing that's so brutal about that is like they're not pandering to like poor people and minorities because they're hoping to get validation from them. Because most of the time they're just hanging out with other rich white people.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's what the thing that like bothers me. Like, they're not even like actually talking or being around poor people because like what they talk about and what I talk to that actual poor people or like in that demographic, it's completely different. The conversation is completely different than what they're talking about. So like they're not only are I feel like their policies don't help, but they're actually out of touch too. So like they're like screwed on like both fronts to me.
Yeah, it's basically it's kind of like Victorian rich white women who are just sitting around gossiping with other rich Victorian white women, and they're just trying to like see it. They're just trying to posture their way to the top of the hierarchy among the heads, so
Yeah,
to speak. And like
yeah,
none of this is actually designed for actual poor people or minorities or anything like that. It's just to impress other rich white.
yeah. Part of me does respect like the more hardcore quote unquote like I guess people I would consider communists because like they actually hate Democrats actually, but obviously they don't align with them because they're more like they'll push the needle more in the direction that they want, but they actually do despise the Democratic Party and everything they
Yeah,
stand for. Because I feel like at least they're even though maybe their thought process and their beliefs are not something I believe in, I feel like they're much more aligned with the plight of poor people than actual Democrats. Like I feel like Democrats they seem more like the neocons of the mid 2000s, if anything, for me. Like I just feel like they're yeah, that's a good description of like Victorian white women trying to just like climb to the whatever it is, whatever the game is, like the social hierarchy or whatever. It's just feels so vapid and fake to me at least.
yeah. It's like they just want to be the top Karen of the HOA. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, but like if they see a minority walking through the neighborhood, they're gonna freak the fuck out. So it's like I don't know. Like it's not that like I'm against white people. It's just it's a certain demographic that like
It's silly.
that it's like pattern recognition, you know? Like I just noticed like it's like well off, rich, white liberal women. Like I've said that before, and like there was one girl. She's like, "Well, I'm not from America." Well, but I'm like, dude, you have European features. You're like, I'm sorry to say, but like you're white, and it's like if we actually want to talk about privilege, like I feel like liberal white women are at the top like of the food chain because tying back to luxury ideas, like if they're wrong about policies that they're pushing or like a narrative, whatever. First of all, like if they're wrong, then the poor people they're trying to help get screwed over. And second of all, like nothing, there's no repercussion, you know, like life goes on, like they're still gonna live in their gated community, like things are good, you know, they live a great quality of life and like they'll never deal with the people they're supposedly trying to help. So the way I gauge is like if you don't have the pulse, like your finger on the pulse of like the actual community, if you're not boots on the ground, like actually understanding what people need, then I feel like you shouldn't speak on it. So and that's another thing I noticed too. A lot of minorities actually do want to vote for Trump just because in a lot of ways they feel like they can trust him more, even if they might not like everything he stands for. Like I feel like they can make more sense out of him than any other fucking installed Democratic candidate that they choose.
Yeah,
It seems
because
like business as usual with the Democrats, you know, and people are just tired of that.
anyway, so like earlier you were talking about how why people tend to think about voting for Trump, what they
Yeah,
prefer about him.
more like yeah, the lower middle class. I feel like they're more receptive to, and I think like what I've heard from more educated liberals is that they kind of look down on those types of people as like uninformed or not uninformed, but like maybe misinformed. And I feel like that in a way, the way I see how we all have our own opinions or whatever, but I feel like that line of thinking is just in line with like the Karens of the world where they think like almost like they know better. They know what's best for the plight of the poor people. In a way that's like one low key like offensive and kind of racist to me. That like a differing opinion, especially depending on like their socioeconomic background, dictates like their level of intelligence or whatever. And I see it as just like they're looking at they're assessing their own lives and like what they need and any policies that kind of resonate with them. Then on another level, I noticed that like the lower middle class don't like the establishment, whether it's left or right, because they're not in that country club. They're not in that fucking friend group or whatever. They live normal lives. They go to Walmart. They, you know, go to movie theaters. Like they do normal people stuff, which nowadays with social media seems like it's uh it's considered poor or whatever. I feel like the normal poor is the new normal. Normal is the new poor. I don't know. Hopefully you get what I mean. But I was gonna make a point of that you sent me a quote the other day talking about how like the aristocrats have like anarchistic tendencies because like if anything happens like they can just up and leave, and the working class man gets stuck with whatever shitty policy that doesn't work for them. They can't just like leave to go to a different country. They're stuck there. I feel like because of that, they're much more there's much more skin in the game for them to like get what they want and to care, I think. And it goes back to, the luxury beliefs that if anything happens, these upper middle class people, they live in their ivory towers and they're insulated from anything that happens.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be the case because then like if you're someone who's relatively poor or you're lower middle class or maybe you just started a business but your
Hmm.
business is struggling to make ends meet, it's like you care about policy more because that actually affects you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like upper middle class and like you're in a nice comfy position, for you politics is just there to make you look good. It's
Yeah,
just
you don't
there
really
so
need it,
it's
really.
just there so that you can like play so that you can be like this upper class technocrat. Like you're part of the anointed class, so you get to like press buttons and pull things and then make people change the like that's where you're that way. And
And it
so for
doesn't
you,
matter
yeah, it's just a
either.
toy. Yeah.
Yeah, I consider it like when I hear people who are well off, and part of me does understand, like, I know, like, my more hardcore, like, straight up socialist or communist friends, they say that, like, at a certain point, depending on, like, your income level, you lose your I don't know, like, let's say, like, your oppression card in the sense that, like, if you're not struggling like how you used to be, then as you get more privilege, you don't have so much of a say. And in a way, I kind of agree. I kind of get it because like when I hear rich people talk about like policy or like just helping the people at the lowest ends of society, I feel like I equate it to water cooler talk, you know, because one, they don't have any context or relation to it, and it's just a polite conversation, to talk about it.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot more about posturing, social posturing, rather than actual policy that affects people. That's why
Yeah.
they don't feel a need to know about specific policies. All they need to know is whichever position they're siding with, that position, if you virtue signal about it, you will get social validation. You win social points. You're part of the cool kids club. You get to
Yeah.
sit at the cool kids table. You're not one of those weirdos.
Yeah.
That's why I think that's why the woke left is so obsessed with taking over institutions. Because if they can take over an institution, and it doesn't have to be like a government institution, it could be something that's in pop culture, like Star Wars. Like a piece
Okay.
of media that's well liked by millions and millions and millions of people around the world. Everyone knows about it. Everyone likes it. Everyone appreciates it. They have to attach themselves to those prestigious institutions so that they can have credibility. And once they have credibility, the casual upper middle class liberal will vote for them just
Right.
simply because they're the ones with the credibility now, you know?
Yeah. Like everything is crazy, like you saying that, and like sometimes I'll mentally reinterpret and reframe certain ideas or behaviors I see on the radical left side, and part of me respects like them playing the game, even though it's like kind of insidious because they're so convicted in what they want that they'll do whatever it takes. And from that standpoint, I do respect that because a lot of casual liberals, like they're the upper middle class, like they're the Karens of the world that kind of don't give a shit, who are again, it's just water cooler talk. Like they're easily swayed, they don't really care, even though like they say you do. It's just posturing versus like the hardcore convicted, like I don't know, like Marxists, whatever. They'll play the game and they'll get their hands dirty. And in that sense, I do respect that because they'll take action.
Yeah,
Like
that's the thing is like conservatives complain a lot, but when push comes to shove, it's like they won't take action.
they
You know,
won't. They're
if you see it
lazy.
especially with like academia, it's like, oh well, I don't want to go to college. It's full of like socialists and left wingers. It's like,
You're gonna be left with them if anything. And like I'll just
yeah,
go from the voter perspective. I've met a lot of lazy conservative voters here, and from when I moved like a decade ago till now, like a lot of conservatives complain about like being California-fied or whatever the hell they want to call it, but they don't do anything about it. And like this is more of like a capitalist complaint, but you hear about a lot of Arizonans because I'm so moderate and like I'm pro Second Amendment, a lot of conservatives do like me. And they consider me, I don't know, they don't use the term ally, but they definitely like, align with me way more and attach themselves more to me. But when I tell them about how, like the talking point is they like to talk about is all the Californians or all the, these people with high incomes are coming over, they're buying all their property. And I just tell them like that's supply and demand. Like there's no law against me moving to some small country or a small town in Montana and just buying a bunch of acres. Like if I
yeah,
have money and like I bid on it and I get it, then I bought it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I just remember you talking a couple conversations back about how the system like is selectively broken. I feel like people like capitalism when it works for them, not against them.
yeah,
Like they're unaccepted. Like this is what I see from a lot of conservatives. Like the bar is set so low in a lot of these states when cost of living just like skyrockets and all these people with remote jobs making six figures come in and buy a bunch of property, they get butthurt. But it's like people will like move to where they can afford to live. And if that angers the locals, then as fucked up as it is, like it's like that's just the nature of I don't know, supply and demand. Like it sucks when you're on the receiving end, but like what can you do about it? Are you gonna take action? Are you gonna work more? Or are you gonna like learn more skills so you can like increase your income? What are you gonna do about it? So when I hear about conservatives talking about like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Like they won't pull their bootstraps up. Like they want life on easy mode. They're like light boomers, and that's the thing that pisses me off about conservatives. Like they won't take action when push comes to shove. They'll just sit and complain.
yeah,
And in the sense, like I respect like again like the woke left more because they'll get their hands dirty. Like they don't care. Like they'll put their money where their mouth is, even if they'll do I guess like not good actions if it means seeing the results that they desire. And I don't see that on the right at all. Like
yeah,
they might be like hardcore kind of like racist on the end, but like I feel like they still wouldn't do anything. But I like me personally, anecdotally, I haven't seen anyone who will actually take action to bring about change. I don't know about you. I don't know how the conservatives are in California.
yeah. In California, it's pretty similar, except their state is already. taken over by Democrats. So
But
like
like,
they
what about the conservatives who live there? Are they even doing anything about it, or are they just
uh
planning
they
exodus
they mostly just complain on like next door app or something.
or like forums or something? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. I think regardless of what happens, like, yes, we have a lot of inequality, but I feel like we have a lot of bread and circus enough to where I feel like honestly, whatever happens, collectively, people will be okay with it. I that's like the black pill in me, if that makes sense. Like as long as we have some kind of housing and like comfort food and entertainment, I think people will put up with damn near anything. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
that's the problem. It's like with historically with a lot of conservatives, it's like they complain about these problems, but because a lot of them are pretty well off, they have the ability to move to a different neighborhood. And just like that, the problem doesn't exist anymore. Until
Yeah.
it comes to their neighborhood, then they complain again. And then the
Yeah, and they're
cycle
just gonna
repeats.
move until they can't. That's why I think like for all the tech people that they complain about, it's like they love to talk shit, like especially like when I tell them about how like, the cost of living. And the thing about money is like I feel like people conflate that with politics or like political alignment, and they really need to like separate it. I feel like most people confuse the two because the money game is something completely separate from politics in my mind. Like for example, in New York, there are penthouses where I shit you not, the rent is $1 million a month. To the regular conservative, they're like, oh, like I would never pay that. That's stupid. But it's like, well, there are people out there making like tens of millions a day. Like you might not believe it because the number's so insane, but like the elite class, like, yeah, they're making money hand over fist. Like they're not the person working 9 to 5. Like the person paying like 10 grand a month to live in Silicon Valley, like they're making insane amounts of money to afford that. And if they work remote and move over to like Arizona or like Texas, like they're gonna destroy you. Like people talk about BlackRock a lot, but like they're only 2 or 3% like in the real estate market. And that's another thing too. Like everything that the conservatives champion, like competition and like meritocracy and just like, you know, making your mark in the world, just being self-sufficient, when it affects them and when they're on the receiving end, like I feel like they could easily be socialists or like liberals that they're complaining about because when they're losing, they can't handle it. So I have very little respect or like their complaints like fall on deaf ears for me.
Yeah, what's that old saying? It's to privatize profit and socialize losses.
Yeah, I just like and a lot of them, it's it's one thing if they're like in the game of like if they're well like I will say this conservatives who are like winning in the sense of like they're doing actually very well and they have successful businesses or like they're making high incomes like they don't give a shit in the sense of like as long as the system's still working the way it is, they'll just play the game. I feel like they're less likely to complain. It's the conservatives who make like 30 grand or less, who are like just like the average Joe that's complaining. Like you're not when I say you, I'm talking about them where I feel like a lot of them are I heard this term somewhere, like embarrassed millionaires. Like they haven't made it yet to the upper class, but they believe that, once they get there, that's why they vote red because they're going to be part of the 1%, but they'll never make it since they won't put in the work to get to be in that social strata. So they're in this limbo of like, okay, like I support everything capitalism stands for, but like I won't put in the work. But I also want to like enjoy the benefits of like low cost of living in a conservative state. But once the liberals come over, then they're just gonna they're like back in the day, what was it? It was South Park where like they had they took our gerbs.
Let
You
the
remember that? Like
girl.
this is like the 2024 version of that. It's like you're not gonna change your behaviors or life to like move up to be like to chase the upward mobility, but you're just gonna sit there and complain. And that's just all I see from most conservatives. And they're the ones more likely to be so embroiled in um like isolated issues. Like I don't know, like on the left it's like what, like just racism on the right, and then for the MAGA people, it's the border or whatever. Like they're just focused so intently on like single issues versus like focusing on bettering their life, you know? I can
Yeah.
see that on both ends, but I just know it's like a lot of Republicans, they're long story long, they're just lazy, and I feel like they just I don't know, in a way they're part of the problem because I feel like the people who actually embody conservative values, they're busy working, or they're busy living their life, if that makes sense. That's just what I've noticed since I moved here.
Yeah, definitely the loudest people, at least are conservatives, are usually the ones that don't make that much money. The ones
Yeah.
that make a lot of money, usually they'll just make their money and then they'll vote and that's it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what they'll do.
Yeah, and like again, it goes back to that thing where they're always complaining. It's like, oh, you shouldn't go to college because it's full of like left wingers. It's like, how do you think it got that way?
Yeah.
Because you won't go into academia, you won't go to college, and so yeah, it's gonna be full of liberals. It's gonna be full of
Yeah,
left wingers. This is what you
exactly.
chose to do
Exactly. And
because
like
yeah,
if you
they
want
not
healthy discourse, you should have like a balanced demographic anyways to have challenge like ideas challenged and everything. I think that's why long form conversations are so vital.
yeah
Um I think I like on the macro level, I have no idea like what the trajectory is. I feel like more people are being informed because I feel like when people become more radicalized, like I always look at income in the sense of or quality of life, and income is like if you're well off, like most people don't care. Like for all the complaints I have about liberal Karens who virtue signal, in a sense they are harmless in the sense that like they've got their life sorted out. You know what I mean? Um, but if you're struggling in life, like anything will like just set you off, you know, whether it's the news or like someone cuts
yeah
you off in traffic, it'll exacerbate because like you're struggling in life. So you're stressed out, you're unhappy, you're not okay with where you're at in life, that you're much more easily manipulated emotionally, and you're more easily to be politically embroiled, you know. Anything you
yeah
see on the news, it'll just set you off. So that's one issue that I feel like people need to pay attention to, like with our quality of life and how good things used to be in the 50s. Like, obviously, racism and all that, and not being white back in the 50s would kind of suck. But yeah, the fact that you can pay a house off in 2 or 3 years on like a minimum wage is like unheard of. Like, that's like you paid off a house on like $7 an hour or whatever the federal minimum wage is. I'm sure it's like under 10 still or whatever. But
yeah
that's how life used to be. And we're talking about context. Like people should be pissed off about that, about how quality of life and the cost of living has skyrocketed. And I don't think any political candidate will ever solve that. But I think that should be more of a focus than anything.
yeah. What I find interesting about the Trump MAGA era is like for the first time, conservatives are actually having to start to question their own neoliberal economics because they're
Yeah,
starting to realize that it can backfire against you.
yeah. Can you like explain that further?
Basically, the idea was back in the 80s, it was assumed that it's like, oh, well, as long as businesses are free to like make as much profit as they want, and it's like they don't have to pay too much in taxes, too much in regulations or anything. It's like just give them freedom to do whatever they want. Don't tax them or regulate them, and everything will turn out fine. And so, the whole trickle down economics thing.
Hmm.
But it turns out it's like if you allow them to do whatever you want, that also means they're allowed to do things like send all the jobs overseas.
Yeah.
They're allowed to gamble away like your housing and the housing market and everything.
Yeah.
They're
Speculate.
allowed they're allowed to crash their economy. They're
Yeah.
allowed to do all sorts of things that go against you. They're allowed to push like woke propaganda on your kids.
Yeah,
It,
like for the mega corporations out there, like I don't think they're doing that because they're all blue-haired, like hardcore feminists. I feel like it's just they're just catering to like the demographic that they think would be most profitable to market to. And so I'm all for free market competition. Like that's like I think any market should be extremely competitive. So like the best businesses, the best ideas will thrive. But yeah, if there's no regulation, then pretty much eventually I don't know, the ones that play the game the best will eventually just like take all the profits and like pay none of the taxes. And it's just every every top level company will eventually just become a monopoly. So
yeah,
that's the downside to doing whatever, letting them do whatever they want. They should be unhindered with like competing businesses, but letting them do whatever they want, that's a recipe for disaster that'll kick in decades down the road. And I think we're feeling it now.
yeah. And I think again, I think it all ties back to the idea of like back then, especially after World War II, there's a clear sense that of what it means to be an American. It's like there's a clear sense that there was a shared common goal for all Americans. Like you want to create a certain kind of society. But nowadays it's like there's that unified vision is gone. Everyone is just making up their own goals in life. And it's like some people want to go here, some people want to go there. And the neoliberal economic model just assumes like if you allow businesses to do whatever they want, pursue whatever goals they want, it's like somehow we'll all meet together in the end. But that's not really true.
Yeah, that's wishful thinking. I think I was gonna like touch upon social cohesion. Like, yeah, like I don't think if you ask, at least if you ask me, like I don't know what it means to be an American. I don't know like how I would feel. Like I wouldn't feel, I guess, unified with the with our citizens at all. And I think we need to focus, or at least like explicitly talk about what values we care about. And I think part of it is not being. There's a lot of anti-America rhetoric, and I understand too. In my experience, it's just I'm just sick of the degeneracy and how life is just progressively getting worse. So that part I'm sick of, but yeah, I don't know what it's like in other countries. Like I know it helps if you're more you have a more homogeneous population. I think it's hard to establish a shared value, especially when we're a melting pot. But I think we need to come up with something that everyone can agree on. Maybe not religion, or like maybe not on religion, but at least like shared common values, and then
Yeah.
unify
Yeah. And
there.
like again, like that kind of goes back to the whole talking point that conservatives often complain about. Like they'll complain about how like there's too much immigration and the immigrants aren't assimilating to American culture. But then you have to ask yourself, what is American culture? Because like
Yeah,
white people don't seem to agree with each other on that one either. And if white people aren't following one concise definition of what it means to be an American, then why should minorities do the same? Because
exactly.
minorities will follow a culture if that culture is strong and confident in itself, and it's competent and it's unified.
It's not
People,
clearly stated. That's
yeah,
a problem.
because people want to be part of the winning team. But if like white Americans aren't willing to to embrace their culture, their identity, and they aren't willing to sell that to the immigrants and minorities, then why would they follow it? So they're just
Yeah,
gonna do what the white people do and just do whatever. It's like this person wants to do that, whatever. That person wants to do that, whatever. This corporation wants to screw over the country for profit, whatever.
Yeah. Like we're running out of time. We got like 3 minutes, but like yeah,
Yeah,
like one thing I'll say about like Vietnamese like culture that, has been developed, I guess in Southern California, like it's amazing what we've done. Just creating our own little pockets and I align more with that. I think that's a good example of like, a minority group building their own industry, their own businesses, and being very well connected, and then still living the American dream. And I think white people don't have that because on the left, they can be like there's quite a few crazies out there, but there's also quite a few crazies on the right too. And it just seems if that's like the baseline, the standard, then like why should minorities care at all
yeah,
what the mainstream like narrative is? Like if that's your starting point, then like a minority can just like say just fuck off and like just do their own thing. Because the white people can't even clean up their own house, like how can they expect to like convince us to like follow them? Like you said.
yeah. Like when the whole illegal immigration thing was a huge problem, like when Trump first came about, like in Westminster in Orange County, it was like those Vietnamese people who were in charge of the city councils who were complaining about it.
Hmm.
And it was funny watching like white people rally behind Asian people.
Yeah, it's just kind of
They're
embarrassing.
willing to talk about it.
Yeah, and I just think I don't know. They has to do like even on the right, I feel low key like they have white guilt, maybe
Yeah.
manifesting in a different way. Like because if they, I don't know, my idea of a true conservative, like they did at least have some balls, and I don't see that on the right at all because they're. That's one thing I forgot to say real quick was like they're just. I feel like they're just a reactionary bunch.
Yeah.
Like yeah, you can like monetize it. Like I see like conservative commentators like making a shit ton of money just reacting. When I don't knock the hustle, but I see no solutions other than like liberal woke and wow, they're crazy. Like that's all I hear.
Anti
There's no
SJW.
alternative. Huh?
It's just anti SJW, that's it.
Yeah, and they're just a reactionary bunch. So I'm like, it's just something to complain about. And like me personally, I don't care unless they're actually gonna offer some alternative solution.
Definitely. So like whichever side is like able to come out with like a concrete vision for how they want the future to be, and they're not afraid to say it out loud in front of everyone, regardless of what the media says about them. It's
Mhm.
like that side I think is gonna win out in the long run.
Yeah. Like we're coming up on a minute, but like yeah, I agree. Like I don't know what the boiling point is for like how radicalized the left and the right gets, but like yeah, like you said, I feel like if there's a strong figure type that just comes out and says things the way they are, I feel like that like they're gonna capture most of the demographics. Like the most convicted, I feel like is gonna win. But right
Yeah,
now, I see nothing on both sides that come close to that. But we'll see.
yeah. Anyways, it was good talking to you today.
All right, man. It was fun. I'll see you. All right.
Yeah,
Bye.
see ya.